I'm making this video to inform people and clear up some misinformation online that I've been seeing. So firstly, in order to define why you can't find chert in your area or your state or anywhere near you, we have to figure out what chert actually is, or flint. So chert is a fine-grained sedimentary rock. It looks like this, and it's most commonly used or seen in history to make arrowheads or artifacts or other kinds of tools such as that. And so it's really useful for flint knappers. It's useful for people who want to make tools or those sort of things because of its conchoidal fracturing, which we'll get into later. But firstly, chert formed roughly in the Jurassic and Cretaceous period when something called a diatom and also radiolaria and a couple other prehistoric microscopic creatures died and fell to the bottom of the ocean floor and created this mat of silica, and that's because their shells were made of silica rather than calcium like crabs or snails. They made silica shells. Now these microscopic creatures, when they died, would make these huge graveyards, these huge mats of silica shells, which over time would get compressed into what is now basically glass, and that's what chert is. And so you have this process here where you have massive amounts of die-off from this creature, and then it has to get pressed. Now, it doesn't really occur in the Paleocene, Eocene, and Miocene, and there's one formation in California where it has occurred. But that means that if your rocks that you're living on are not older or as old as the Cretaceous or Jurassic period, which is like 145 million years ago, roughly, you're not going to have any chert because there hasn't been enough time for a shallow ocean to appear and all of these creatures to so you have to be somewhere where a lot of these creatures died. It's basically a fossil. So you're asking yourself, why am I not finding T-Rexes in Hawaii? Well, because they didn't live there. And so you have to live in a place where these radiolaria and these diatoms lived. Now, one of the most knappable rock dead zones on the entire planet, and I'm going to ignore islands for right now, though they do have a lot of volcanic rock, is the Pacific Northwest. And I know people in the East Coast, they also have a hard time, and we'll get into that. But the Pacific Northwest is especially dead because in Washington, Oregon, and Idaho, they have had glaciers, they've had volcanic activity, and they've had absolutely massive, like 60 to 100-foot basalt flows, probably even 300-foot tall basalt flows that have covered over a third of the entire state. And so everything that would be old enough to have chert is buried thousands of feet below the surface where you could get to it, and there's no exposure to bring chert out. And this has been the case for a long time. The natives in Washington have simply just gotten around it by mostly using bone tools, wood and rock and those sort of things, and smooth rocks and polishing them. But they almost never used conchoidally fracturing rocks such as agate, jasper, those kind of things. Now what we do have in Washington State is we do have rhyolite, we have basalt, we have carnelian, jasper, some agates, and petrified wood. And these are all really crummy for making arrowheads, given the quality of the material. Our petrified wood is extremely grainy, and the silica it got replaced with is formed in large, coarse crystals rather than the extremely fine petrified wood you might find in other places. The jasper here is not like the jasper that you would find down south in Texas or Arizona. It's really, really rough jasper that needs to be heat treated for a long time, and even then it's only, comparable to maybe a rhyolite. And so we don't have any good knappable rock in the Pacific Northwest, and that's the case for a lot of places in Canada as well, because the glaciers have destroyed a lot of the bedrock and replaced it with glacial till, which is these huge floods of sand and mud that have covered everything thousands of feet up. This is also why Washington, Oregon, Idaho artifacts look like this, and then in Missouri and Texas and these other places it looks like this. So now that we've kind of talked about the Pacific Northwest a little bit, where does chert form? And that is, this is a good map right here. This is just a map of the Great Plains. But because they haven't had as much exposure to glacier activity, there isn't a lot of volcanic activity. It used to be an ancient ocean bed. We know that. You can go see videos of San Antonio and fossil hunting there. It's just all has been aquatic, limestone, chert, flint, everything perfect. That whole area has chert. And in some areas, maybe like Nebraska, they don't have a lot of chert. But not too deep. It's under there, and a lot of these places, Missouri, Indiana, Arkansas, Texas, great places for chert. Now, if we look at the East Coast, you can see, and I'm not doing the whole East Coast, but maybe just some of it, you can see that there's relatively low chert deposits. And I'm not sure why exactly this is. I'm going to guess that it might be because of volcanic activity from the Appalachian Mountains, which could be similar to the situation here in the Pacific Northwest. You have volcanic activity, you're north enough that you had glaciers, and so some of these things have removed a lot of these older dinosaur age rocks that you would need to find chert. So that is a possibility. And before you comment and say, oh, hey, people in Washington, Oregon, and Idaho, there's a great place called the Glass Buttes in Oregon that you can drive 8 hours to and load 250 pounds. Or people who even say that there's obsidian in Washington and Oregon, or Washington and Idaho. There is obsidian in Washington, and it's on an Indian reservation, and you cannot collect it. And there's also obsidian in Idaho with a very similar story. And the Glass Buttes is great, but some of us don't really want to use obsidian. We want to use things that maybe we could find in the history books. Very few people actually used obsidian in the majority of the world. It's only really in this area. And it gets a little boring. It's the same color. It's super glassy. You don't hit it very hard. It's very maybe unique to people who don't have obsidian. But if you only knap obsidian, you'll know what I'm talking about. It's sometimes you want something that's a little bit stronger. Now, why is jasper and agate and these other rocks, why are they bad? Why are they not chert? Why can't I just go grab these rocks that have higher silica content and knap them? Well, the reason is knapping has a lot to do with something called conchoidal fracturing. And this is a conchoidal fracture in obsidian. It essentially means that the silica content is high enough that the knapper can predict what the flake is going to look like before they hit the stone. And when you have a stone that's really good, you can get some beautiful, beautiful arrowheads because you can predict how it's going to look after you're done. But if you have rocks like basalt or jasper, those kind of things, poor quality jasper, of course, it's going to be really hard because you're going to get step fractures, you're going to get nasty, hinges. And so this is an example of a quartzite arrowhead. And the reason you can't get quartzite to look so perfect like the other ones is because it has a high content of other minerals. And when you knap, the flake travels and then it hits something like iron or some other material, and it doesn't flake the way you want it to. It's not predictable. And so that unpredictability makes it very hard to make tools reliably out of these materials. You may find a lot of videos online talking about, well, I found flint on every railroad track I've ever seen in Arkansas and Texas and Oklahoma, so just go check your local railroad track. And I've checked, the whole Pacific Northwest, people use what rock is nearby that's hard. And they're not rock that's nearby that's hard and cheap is basalt. So if you go to a railroad track anywhere in California, Oregon, Washington, Idaho, Montana, you're going to find basalt or rhyolite or pumice or something else, but you can't find flint. I mean, it's just, that's how it is. There's no chert or flint in these states except for very small outcrops like in California. And if you live in California, chances are you don't live by it. It's probably going to be a 12-hour detour. So just keep in mind that a lot of these videos talking about where you can find flint and you're a dummy if you can't. It's not like that. It's really about finding a T-Rex fossil. That's essentially what you're tasked with. And if you live in a place where T-Rex didn't exist or existed and was buried under sediment, and volcanic activity, you're never going to find it and you're never going to be able to reach it. So I hope that answered some questions and cleared up some problems. A lot of people don't live in these areas who flint knap. People just don't do it because there's not a lot of arrowheads to find. Most people made bone tools. So maybe you're not as interested, or people in these states don't get into it. But I'm here to tell you that that is why there's so many videos telling you where to find flint or chert and you're not finding it because we don't have it